teach here at the AA. We have been trying to twist his arm to be involved with the school for some time, and through the support of Jean-Michel and the communication department, finally I think we have some very nice things happening. Of course, the lecture tonight accompanies the wonderful installation that Antoni has done for us, that I'm sure most of you have seen upstairs in the front members' room, the installation Echoing the Pavilion, initially based on readings and an understanding of the Bexhill Pavilion, its location, its proximity to the sea, and in a sense the way in which Antoni's reflections bring together, as he says, the fourth dimension into a kind of two-dimensional plane, trying to address the waves, the time, the sound, the movements onto the flat surface of the wall through color and pigment. I actually witnessed Antoni working on that piece for days, and it was wonderful the way that he changed and transformed the surfaces over and over again. Antoni Malinowski had a solo exhibition at the Camden Arts Center in 1997. His work is in many major collections, and he has recently done a piece for the Royal Court Theatre and is collaborating also with Bowles-Wilson Architects for the Luxor Theatre in Rotterdam. Please welcome Antoni Malinowski.
Thank you. Good evening. The exhibition at the Delaware Pavilion brought together different aspects of my work within the thematically unified show. The seaside light which penetrates the building was reflecting off the pigmented surfaces of the paintings, and they in turn were echoed by the whitewashed drawings on the roof terrace. My dialogue with that architecture kept opening new spaces. The roots of my work are in the discipline of painting. What this archaic activity can offer us in the age of the internet. The raison d'être, The raison d'être of the visible is the eye. Painting is the affirmation of the visible, which surrounds us and constantly appears and disappears. Painting is about concrete presence. Painting reestablishes human body as the center of energy and the source of perception. There is an optical density in painting, which is due to the fact that 4 dimensions are transcribed onto two-dimensional surface. This happens through the rhythm of brushstrokes. Time here is the form of matter in motion. I'm not interested in the painting as a virtual image disconnected from the outside space, but as something which is part of three-dimensional and therefore architectural space. Movement between 2 and 3 dimensions is inherent in visual perception of anything. This way of thinking made me consider more and more space around the paintings and drawings and in between them. The relationship between pictorial and three-dimensional space is something which many painters took into consideration. It is a tradition which goes back to ancient times, later developed very much by Venetian painters like Veronese or Tiepolo, and in modern times taken up by Roscoe, Fontana or Cy Twombly. In diptychs or triptychs, wall becomes integral part of the painting. The wall space bridges and separates, produces a single vision by means of a gap. At the same time, I kept analyzing the space within paintings by pulling apart different elements, mostly line and brush mark. Sometimes line and brush mark got separated in order to investigate architectural spaces. Here, the drawing looks at a flat ceiling, or rather joins, links the flat ceiling and a cross vault in a chapel in Bath. It was a kind of investigation of that architecture. At the same time, it was also observation of light, and so observation of the borders, what happens at the borders of natural and cultural orders. In those installations, I also experimented with mediated image, that of video, and juxtaposed it with time element of a performance. However, what truly interests me is the real space, the unmediated experience, and the collaboration with the viewer, and with the viewer's constructive elements of perception. Another architectural setting, St. Pancras Station, a group exhibition called Northern Adventures. Due to fire regulations and security requirements, etc., it was impossible for me to do anything else but paint in the gutters. This work focuses on the wastelands of real space. Edward said something to the effect that the center can be seen much clearer from the margins. After establishing the shape of the puddles of the red and blue paint, I drew black marks within the red, marks from the symbols from topographical maps, mostly coniferous and deciduous trees and nuclear shelters. On the right-hand side, I just marked time with white strokes. When I was making this piece and kneeling down there, a passerby asked if I'm measuring subsidence of the building, which I thought was a very beautiful idea. The work somehow survived for 9 years, and this summer I went with a friend to film it. Here is a little video clip. slides back. A group show called What is a Photograph? For this, I did a floor drawing. Here I thought not only about the chronological time, but also about the chronoscopic notion of time, which is underexposed, exposed, and overexposed. I dedicated the work to a friend who had died a couple of weeks before that exhibition took place. Another floor drawing at Camden Arts Centre, this time in relation to paintings on canvas. This work was very much about different scales, juxtaposing different scales, going from micro to macro, with the human scale somewhere in the middle. I called the show Synchrony, as it was the simultaneity of different levels of time that was the starting point of my thinking. Here, three diptychs were interacting with a very large space of the main gallery. I'm asked sometimes about the psychology of color, of the meaning of color. It is a very difficult question, impossible really to generalize about this, because the meaning changes from culture to culture, and even within one culture, it often has dual or contradictory meaning. Or meanings. Color on a monumental scale should be simplified, reduced to few hues. The eye can read the image in an instant before wandering in. The choice of a hue of color is then narrowed to a choice of a pigment. Pigment is a materiality of color. This materiality has its history. There are many new synthetic wonderful pigments, but there are some which are very old. For example, green earth and vermilion were used in late Gothic, early Renaissance to paint flesh. So, for example, Duccio's Madonna at the National Gallery is painted with such pigments. The wall drawing, sort of a diagram, was mirroring the diptych, engaging with the negative space of this painting. It's quite strange then to be asked to take this kind of work into a corporate environment. This is a floor in a shopping mall at Canary Wharf. However, it was an interesting exercise to translate a freehand drawing using very sophisticated computer technology into stone. The stones I found in Venice. Here was the very first commission I did for wall painting. Well, it was quite overwhelming to be faced with such views through the windows, and also the beautiful Marmorino wall, which prepared for me by the same people who worked for Scarpa. Architecture of British architect Michael Karapetian was also very difficult to deal with. The complexity of the Venetian context made me turn to almost archaic simplicity. The large wall demanded a big gesture, reconnecting the two sides divided by the opening. Finding the right pigment and finding the right brush was very important. The brush determines speed of a gesture, the time it takes to make the gesture is the fourth dimension incorporated into painting. perhaps here in Venice, the birthplace of Marco Polo, it's appropriate to mention the Chinese tradition of painting. The Chinese incorporated time into their painting in a comprehensive theoretical way, which was never really the case in the West. The initial very quick brushstroke was then juxtaposed with a rhythm of small brush marks. As I went along, tracing the light movement on the wall, more and more spaces kept opening. I saw my task as connecting the inside to the outside, and also linking the wall, or linking to the wall, the memory of what you might have seen from the windows, from the level above. Like in Chinese painting, the empty spaces in between the strokes facilitate the transition between the real space and the pictorial space, and from the pictorial to the real. In a different part of the building, there was a small window, inaccessible at the beginning of the work. When I finally climbed the scaffolding and looked through it, to my amazement, there was a perfectly framed Palladius church, Il Redentore. To mark this encounter, I decided to paint a reflection on the opposite wall. And to paint this, I chose lapis lazuli, not only because it's the most precious of pigments, but because its broken crystal-like structure refracts the light in the most beautiful way. Of course, all this is unphotographable. This process of excavating through layering formed basis of my royal court work. Before showing the video film, which is self-explanatory, I just want to come back to color, hue, and pigment. In this project, there were three contradictory requirements I had to reconcile. First of all, to make the wall project onto the square, overriding the real facade. Secondly, to enlarge optically the small foyer area, and to make sure that color will be pleasant for people who are there. My research took me to Pompeii and Torre Annunziata. The Roman wall painting at the Villa of the Mysteries has a dark vermilion background, which optically is space generating. One more existing example at the Villa of Plontis convinced me, and I was quite sure what pigment I needed. Then followed 2 years of searching for the manufacturer of such a pigment. The modern technology of high-quality synthetic binders made this painting possible, because after the Roman technique of wax painting was lost, vermilion wasn't used in wall painting as lime in fresco makes vermilion go black. I just want to say that this project happened because of a fantastic relationship, working relationship I had with Steve Tompkins of Howard Tompkins Architects, who did the refurbishment. And also the client, the Royal Court, who welcomed a living, unprotected work of art at the center of the very busy building. Can we have the film, please? Okay, thank you very much. If there are any. I don't know if I'm supposed to answer some questions.
You know, it's wonderful to have a brief presentation, but it normally works the other way around. The people that you want them to do a 40-minute presentation, they normally do an hour and a half. And people that you want them to talk for an hour and a half, they normally do 40-minute presentations. Anyway.
I'm sorry, I rushed through, but it's I don't know, couldn't help it.
It's good. Does anyone have any questions for Antoni? Please. Do you have a microphone?
That's okay, I can hear.
No, but we...
Sorry?
I wonder if you could speak about the performativity in the work, because obviously you wouldn't have to carry out every brush stroke of this plan, especially in the larger sites, the more large scale, up with a canvas. But you could do a plan and someone else can help you or assist you. And in all of those photographs, I never saw one assisted.
No,
So
because
obviously it's very important to you that you enact every stroke.
that's right. Yes. Yes, it is. Well, because a brush mark is not only a physical gesture, but it has within it the inherent meaning and sensibility, and I believe that. Yes, it is in a sense the source of meaning of the work, and therefore in fact, at the Royal Court I had an assistant, and who helped me mix the paint and do all this, and for the in a sense layering with the big brush, because there were two brushes of extreme dimensions. One, the biggest decorator's brush you can have, which, of course, the movement has to be very quick, and the brush number one, with which I did the strokes, which counteract. So there are the two tempi working together, contrasting. And so anyhow, this guy who is a very good and sensitive painter, that's why I chose him to work with me. He did a couple of times section some part of the wall with the big brush, and he was very good at it. However, I could see the enormous difference. And it is something to do with the way the brush is pressed to the surface, and this is the individual, in a sense, something to do with the individual, and something which really carries the meaning. And so then, in the final coats, I did it all myself, and he was just mixing the paint because it was basically impossible. So yes, I very much believe in that, and that's why I mentioned the Chinese tradition of painting, because of course that's very much part of that tradition, that the brush mark, the stroke is the meaning. Yes.
What about the question of paints and color that you were mentioning? Something about new paints? It's interesting, you know.
Yes.
What's happening in terms of chemical development?
That's I mentioned it in relation to the Royal Court again because of the vermilion. Mm-hmm. The vermilion was used by the Romans with the wax wall painting technique, which was lost in the Dark Ages, and with the fresco technique, which relies on lime, you could never use vermilion because it goes black. And so it was never used, really. And then, so nowadays I was able to use it because I was able, first of all, specify the plaster, which was lime-free, and that's something mixed with what is called fiber something. Oh, I don't know. They're cast panels. Anyhow, it's a different way of building the wall, and also the binder of my paint. So what I mix the pigment with, it's a very new, very modern acrylic binder, and it doesn't interact with vermilion or any other pigment really. It does. There is no chemical reaction, and so it is possible. And this binder is extremely tough, extremely durable, extremely wonderful, really, to paint, to use, and so it is possible to do such things, which say 20 years ago, probably even 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to paint with that pigment. So yes, so that's that. Yes.
I have a question. First thing is, when you start painting, do you have any project before that, or you just come to the wall? You know what I mean? Because my question actually is, are you afraid of a blank wall or a blank piece of paper? Like, because some people are
Sure,
afraid.
of
You
course.
see the blank thing and then suddenly, I don't know what to do. So I wanted to, because you
Yes.
said something about Chinese way of drawing and the significance of the brush.
Yes.
stroke.
Yes, I've got you. Yes. Oh, okay.
Okay, I mean, first thing is, what do you have the blank? Are you afraid of the blank? And the second is, what do you feel when you do the first brush?
Yes.
Feeling.
Okay.
Like,
Sure, of course. It's always extremely scary to do a first stroke or write the first thing on a blank page, because we open up all the possibilities suddenly. Yes, we open up the whole universe, and I can illustrate this question with the work in Venice. So, because it was such an extreme situation, having this most beautiful wall made for me, Marmorino wall, which probably cost already £10,000, plus having this incredible pressure that whatever I do, I will not be able to remove it or change it or nothing. And thirdly, really the thought that, I thought the wall was so beautiful that, really I didn't want to do anything there. The situation was perfect anyhow, the views from the window, Venice here, lagoon there. I mean, why to even do anything? However, it was December and it was very cold, and I kept going there every day and looking at this wall and thinking, well, all right, I have to deal with it. And then I found problems, in a sense, so I problematized my situation, the work, and I saw this, in a sense, the problem of the wall being divided. It had to be really linked and joined together optically. And so I somehow knew that if I start with a small stroke, with a small brush, I would never be able to do it. It will just be too frightening. So I went, the extreme way, and found the biggest brush possible, which is, the decorator's brush. I chose the color, in relation to the color scheme of the architect, somehow in relation to it. And I decided that I'm going to do this huge stroke, this gesture, going from top right to somewhere left down there. And it is going to be like a performance. And it was like a dance, really, because I couldn't stop. I had to continue, because you would see any movement is visible, because the bristle makes the mark. So I psyched myself for about a couple of days and sat there and thought about it, and most of it I could do just standing, but there was one bit where I had to start on a chair and then jump very quickly, but without making any movement, and then continue. And that's what I did, one Sunday morning when there was nobody there. I just did it in half an hour. But it took me, I suppose, a couple of weeks to think about it. So, and so it is, in a way, similar way of working to the to the Chinese or within the Oriental tradition, because the image is interiorized first. So I know what I'm going to do. I think about it, I concentrate on it, and then I do it. And so sometimes, of course, with bigger pieces like that one, I had to plan it. I kind of followed a very classical, in fact, technique of drawing with charcoal on paper, the shapes and movements of the light, and then I traced it onto the wall with very delicate, pencil marks. So I knew where more or less to go, because if you're working on a scale which is bigger than a human, you lose ability to judge the movement being close by, and you cannot be close by at the same time out there. So there are certain technical requirements that, yes, you have to take on board. But I generally think about very much, yes, the rectangle. So if I'm painting, say, on canvas, I take on board the rectangle and what is it, what I want from it, in a sense, and do a lot of sketches. I tend to draw all the time and sketch, and then somehow go like this. So, I don't know if this answers your question.
Can you say something about the difference in terms of the status of surface and line? Like upstairs, there are the lines and the cut marks almost that are on the ceiling. And then there are places where you're dealing more with the idea of the surface. And if we go back to some of the early slides that you showed, and you're on the interior, and then you start drawing rectangle within a rectangle, or shifts in terms of the geometry. In some ways it looks very similar to an architectural plan or the juxtaposition of a plan. So I'm wondering whether do you make any kind of distinction when you're using line work versus like in Venice, where maybe the gestures are still, in terms of the overall wall, smaller to constitute a kind of surface, an overall surface condition. The idea of geometrical lines in some way disappear.
Well, yes, there are two different aspects of the work, because the line drawing, so say something what is upstairs on the ceiling, it's for me like an extension of my freehand drawing. And I just found a way of translating it onto large scale by cutting or tearing bits of bitumen paper, in fact. And this is the way which practically I can do it. Otherwise it would take forever, because one has to make the mark and then go there and see it. And then, so this way I can use assistants to just place the lines. However, I actually tear them and cut them, so I somehow retain some sort of physicality which is appropriate to my drawings. And somehow I think it does translate the freehand drawing onto architectural surface. So this is one thing, and the other is painting proper, where line is part of the painting. So either is painted or is just drawn with by hand with a pencil. So it's very much part of the surface. And here in this installation upstairs, for the first time in a very long time, I juxtaposed the two elements, and something which I don't do very often because, yes, it opens up. Sometimes it's very difficult. It can be very difficult, but somehow I felt that perhaps it works. Yes, I don't know what to say about the architectural nature of the drawing. Well, I suppose the drawings which I do on walls or ceilings and in architectural space, they do relate to that space. So they have to, in a sense, look a little bit architectural because that's the space. And I try to, I don't know, work with it and take it as a sculptural space, which is created by the architect. Yes.
Would anyone else like to ask any other questions from Antoni? No? Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.